The wind howled through the pines as Jacob Carter urged his horse down the treacherous slope toward Silver Bend. What he'd give for a bottle of Doc Henderson's fever tonic, but fate had other plans. The sight in the town square hit him like a shotgun blast, his wife Eleanor and their boy Tommy, wristbound, standing on a wooden platform with a sign that read, "Spring Stock Prime, Help Wanted." The kind of sign that made a man's blood boil. Spring had painted the valley in wildflowers, but the beauty was a cruel joke. The thaw had brought more than just bluebirds and runoff. It carried the stench of greed. Up in the high country, Jacob's cabin clung to the cliffs like a stubborn tick. He'd built it himself after fleeing Silver Bend 2 winters back, when the mine foreman's debts turned into fists and the sheriff's justice came with a price tag. Folks in town called him Mad Carter, now said he traded his wits for wolf pelts. Let them talk. Better their tall tales than the truth that a man could only take so much before he cracked. But last night changed everything. Tommy's cough had turned wet and ragged, and Eleanor's hands trembled as she pressed a locket into Jacob's palm, their son's first tooth wrapped inside. No words, just the unspoken plea. Fix this. He rode like the devil was on his heels, splashing through icy creeks and dodging fallen timber. By the time Silver Bend's crooked rooftops appeared, the sun was dipping behind the saloon, casting long fingers of shadow across the mud-choked streets. The town had dressed itself up for spring new paint on the brothel, a brass band murdering a waltz outside the mercantile. Then he saw it, a banner flapping over the auction block, its letters bleeding red in the twilight. Labor and livestock, no reserve. Jacob's gut twisted. Since when did Silver Bend deal in human cattle? A voice slithered from the alley. Ain't you a sight? Heard you was dead. Carter. Deputy Vance leaned against a post, picking his teeth with a bowie knife. Funny how sickness brings wolves to the door. Jacob's hand drifted to his Colt. Funny how some doors need kicking open. The crowd parted as he strode toward the platform. Eleanor's eyes flashed not fear, but fire. Tommy's small frame shook, but he stood tall, chin up like his daddy taught him. A man in a stovepipe hat raised his gavel. Next lot, sturdy woman and Jacob's bullet split the wood between the auctioneer's fingers. Ain't no lot. That's my family. Silence, then chaos. Vance's posse reached for their irons, but Jacob was already moving. He'd forgotten the weight of a gunfight, the way time stretched thin as spider silk. But some things, like protecting what's yours, come back fast as a trigger pull. Later they'd say Mad Carter rode out of Silver Bend with smoke at his back, and a boy's laughter ringing over the gunfire. Truth was, Tommy never laughed. He clung to his mother wide-eyed as Jacob spurred them toward the mountains. Ain't gonna lie to you, son, Jacob muttered, wiping blood from his knuckles. World's uglier than a gut-shot bear, but we're gonna make it ugly right back. The locket burned in his pocket. Some debts he realized weren't meant to be paid. They were meant to be settled. Jacob had learned the hard way that some towns wore their sins like a Sunday suit. Silver Bend was no exception. But that damned banner, labor and livestock, itched under his skin like a tick digging in. He'd come for medicine, not a front-row seat to hell's marketplace. The clinic should have been his first stop. Instead, he found a boarded-up husk, the words, "Closed by order of Marshal Tate," scrawled in red paint that dripped like fresh blood. Old Doc Henderson wouldn't have shut his doors unless they'd pried him out with a crowbar. The memory of the doc stitching Tommy's forehead after a tumble from the barn loft flashed in Jacob's mind. Steady hands, no questions asked. Now just silence and a sour stink of corruption hanging thicker than the coal smoke. The square was a circus of misery. Lanterns swung overhead, casting jagged shadows on faces slick with whiskey and greed. Men in bowler hats clutched ledgers, licking their pencils like they were tallying hogs, not human beings. Then Jacob saw them. Eleanor, her dress ripped at the shoulder, wrists raw from rope burns. Tommy swaying on his feet, his cough rattling like dice in a cup. Tags around their necks, healthy breeder, 350, and sickly sprout, 75. The numbers punched the air from Jacob's lungs. $75. That's what some bastard thought his boy's life was worth. A auctioneer with a waxed mustache banged his gavel. Next lot's a steel gentleman. Woman still got her teeth, and the whelp's got spirit. Jacob didn't remember moving. 1 second he was frozen, the next he was plowing through the crowd like a bull through brambles. Some fool grabbed his arm. Jacob twisted until something snapped. Another man lunged, crack, his nose exploded in a spray of crimson confetti. The crowd's murmurs turned to shrieks as Jacob vaulted onto the platform. Two rifle-toting goons swung their barrels toward him. Amateurs. He drove the first man's own rifle into his gut, then pistol-whipped the second so hard his hat flew off like a startled bird. Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos. Jacob the fire too late. The overturned lantern licked hungrily at the auction banners, flames skittering up the posts. Smoke billowed, and in the confusion, Jacob hauled Tommy onto his back and gripped Eleanor's hand. "Time to go, darling." They plunged into the alley where the shadows swallowed them whole. Halfway to the livery, a figure materialized from the gloom, Deputy Vance blocking their path with a shotgun. "Tate'll hang you for this, Carter," he sneered, thumbing the hammer. Jacob's laugh was colder than a midwinter creek. "Funny. I was just thinking the same about you." A click sounded behind Vance. Eleanor pressed the stolen Bowie knife to his kidney. "Drop it," she hissed, "or I'll see what kind of guts you're really made of." The deputy's shotgun hit the dirt. Jacob kicked it into the sewer grate. "Tell Tate something for me," he said, stepping close enough to smell Vance's fear sweat. "Auction's over." They rode hard for the mountains, Tommy wedged between them, his feverish head lolling against Jacob's chest. The boy murmured something delirious. "Pa, the fire." It looked like dragons, and Jacob choked back a laugh that tasted like gunpowder and hope. "Ain't no dragon, son," he muttered, spurring the horse faster. "Just the world burning itself clean." Behind them, Silver Bend's glow painted the sky the color of shame. Ahead, only the wild waiting dark. And maybe a chance to start again. The cedars whispered overhead as Jacob Carter cradled Tommy against his chest, the boy's breath shallow as a creek in drought. Behind them, Silver Bend burned not just the auction block, but the whole damn notion that men could put prices on other men's souls. Eleanor stumbled beside him, her dress torn, her eyes hollowed out by smoke, and something worse, the realization that the world could be this cruel. "Jacob," she kept murmuring, not to him, but to the night itself, like it might give her answers. Tommy coughed a wet, ugly sound, and Jacob's grip tightened. The fever was eating the boy alive. "We need to get higher," Jacob growled, eyeing the switchback trail snaking up Black Elk Ridge. "Tate's men'll be on us by dawn." Eleanor nodded, but her legs buckled. Jacob caught her elbow, felt her trembling. "Damn it, Ellie, I'm fine," she lied, wiping soot from her lips. "Just need a minute." A minute they didn't have. Then a miracle. Or maybe a trap. The scent of wood smoke curled through the pines. Not the acrid stink of Silver Bend's destruction, but the earthy tang of a cook fire. Jacob's finger hovered over his Colt's trigger as a figure materialized from the trees, an old Nez Perce woman, her braids silver in the moonlight, stirring a pot over flames. "Saw your fire," she said, nodding toward the distant glow. Stupid. But then white men always are. Jacob's jaw clenched. "We don't want trouble." "Trouble," the woman snorted. "You're carrying it in your arms." She jabbed her ladle at Tommy. "Boy's lungs are drowning. You want him to live, sit." Eleanor made a small broken noise. Jacob hesitated. This reeked of an ambush, but Tommy whimpered, and that decided it. They crouched by the fire as the woman rummaged in her pack, producing a bundle of dried roots. "Yarrow," she muttered, crushing it into a tin cup. "Not as good as whiskey, but the damn army took mine." The twist in her voice, half amusement, half fury, made Jacob pause. Maybe they weren't so different. Tommy thrashed as she forced the bitter tea down his throat. "Hold him still," she snapped. "Or would you rather dig his grave tomorrow?" Jacob pinned the boy's shoulders, heart hammering. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Tommy took a deep, clear breath, his first in hours. "Cost you," the woman said, wiping her hands. Jacob reached for his coin purse, but she shook her head. "Not that. A story." Her eyes gleamed. "Why's Marshall Tate selling folks like cordwood?" Jacob's laugh was a razor dragged over stone. "Same reason men like him always do. Because he can." The woman studied him, then tossed a small pouch into Eleanor's lap. "More yarrow. Boil it twice a day. And Carter." She jabbed a finger at the distant firelight. "You burn their stage. Next time, burn the whole damn town." As they vanished into the trees, Tommy stirred in Jacob's arms. "Pa," he mumbled, "she talked to ghosts." Jacob adjusted his grip, feeling the weight of the boy, The rifle, the reckoning to come. Nah, son, he murmured. Just the kind that ain't dead yet. Above them, the stars wheeled. Somewhere down the mountain, Tate's posse would be gathering. Let them come. Jacob Carter had a new debt now, and this one he'd pay in lead. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the dark like tiny rebellion flags. Jacob watched them fade, his knuckles white around the hilt of his knife. Eleanor's words hung between them. Taxes County land a paper with a fake seal. Christ, it was almost funny. Back in Silver Bend, they'd at least been honest about their thievery. Here they dressed it up in ink and bureaucracy like a whore in a Sunday bonnet. Tommy stirred under the blanket, his breath still too quick, too shallow. The Nez Perce woman's yarrow had helped, but the boy needed real medicine. Jacob's gaze cut to the canyon walls looming above them. There's a mining camp past the ridge, he said abruptly. Doc Henderson's brother works there. He'll have supplies. Eleanor's head snapped up. We can't risk it. Tate's men won't look for us in a den of drunk miners, Jacob finished, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Besides, the last time I checked, outlaws don't pay taxes either. The joke fell flat, but it did what he needed. Eleanor's shoulders straightened, her chin lifting. That was his Ellie. Give her a target and the fear burned right out of her. They moved at first light, Tommy bundled in Jacob's coat, his small body radiating heat like a forge. The trail was a bastard, narrow slick with dew and littered with loose shale that clattered like warning bells with every step. Halfway up, Eleanor froze. Jacob, she hissed. Below them, a rifle's glint winked between the trees. Jacob shoved Tommy into Eleanor's arms and drew his Colt in one fluid motion. Keep moving. Don't stop till you hit the camp. Like hell. Ellie, he growled, that's an order. For a heartbeat, she looked ready to argue. Then Tommy coughed and the sound decided it. She fled up the trail, her skirt snagging on brush. Jacob turned toward the trees, his voice booming. Come on out, deputy. Or you gonna shoot a man in the back like the coward you are. A chuckle. Then Vance stepped into the open shotgun cradled in his arms. Ain't a deputy no more, Carter. Tate promoted me to problem solver. He spat. Starting with you. Jacob's thumb eased back the hammer. Funny, I solve problems too. He nodded at Vance's bandaged side. How's that kidney feeling? Vance's smirk faltered. That split second was all Jacob needed. His bullet took the man in the shoulder, spinning him like a top. The shotgun discharged wild, peppering the cliffs with buckshot as Vance went down screaming. Tell Tate something, Jacob yelled over the echoes. His problems are coming to collect. He didn't wait for a reply. The mining camp loomed ahead, its smoke staining the dawn sky. Somewhere in that chaos of greed and grime was their last hope. And Jacob Carter, well, he'd never met a hope he couldn't turn into a weapon. Tommy's faint voice carried back to him, Pom. You think they got candy at the camp? Jacob's laugh was a dark, broken thing. Sure, son. And if they don't, he patted his Colt. We'll make 'em find some. The badges gleamed in Jacob's palm like fresh blood under the morning sun. He tossed one to Eleanor. Pin that on, he said, his voice rough as gravel. We're paying Red Creek a visit. Eleanor caught the badge, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from something hotter. You expect us to waltz into town wearing dead men's tin? Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Christ, Jacob, even for you, this is genius. He flashed her a grin that was all teeth. Tate's men won't question their own. Not with half the town in chaos after that fire. He knelt beside Tommy, pressing the second badge into the boy's small hand. You're my prisoner now, Sprout. Think you can play sick? Tommy's eyes lit up despite his fever. Do I get to cough blood? Attaboy. Jacob ruffled his hair, then turned to Eleanor. The humor drained from his face. We get in Fine Granger and make him sing like a canary in church. Then we burn the whole damn system to the ground. Eleanor opened her mouth probably to call him insane when a twig snapped behind them. Jacob spun Colt drawn to find the young rider he'd shot groaning in the dirt. The kid couldn't have been older than Tommy would be in 10 years, clutching his bleeding shoulder with shaky hands. Please, he stammered. I just needed the job. Jacob's finger hovered on the trigger. The kid's boots were worn through his coat threadbare. A starving dog sent to do a wolf's work. What's your name, boy? Ellie. Tell me Eli. Jacob crouched, low voice dropping to a whisper. That job pay enough to sell children. The kid's face crumpled. I didn't know Granger said they were debt runners. Of course he did. Jacob stood abruptly, holstering his gun. Here's your new job. Run back to Red Creek. Tell Granger you saw us heading east toward the river. He tossed the kid a strip of cloth to staunch the bleeding. And Eli, next time you pick a side, make sure it's got a soul. As the kid scrambled away, Eleanor gripped Jacob's arm. That was a mistake. Probably Jacob watched the boy disappear into the trees. But the world's got enough monsters. No need to make more. The twist in his voice, part steel, part sorrow, silenced her. For the first time since the auction, she saw the man beneath the fury, the one who'd once carried her across a flooded river just to see her smile. Tommy broke the silence with a theatrical cough, splattering red berry juice down his chin. Am I doing it right, Pom? Jacob's laugh was sudden, bright, and wholly out of place in their nightmare. You're a natural outlaw. He hoisted the boy onto his shoulders, nodding toward the smoke-choked horizon. Now let's go give Red Creek a show they'll never forget. The badges caught the light as they moved, flashing like false stars. Behind them, the wind carried the scent of burning pine and the first whispers of a reckoning long overdue. The fire crackled like distant gunfire as Jacob methodically loaded his revolver, each bullet clicking into place with cold precision. Eleanor watched from the corner. Tommy curled against her, his feverish breaths fogging the chilly air. The cabin, their sanctuary, now felt like a war room, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of how fragile their peace had been. You're really going back, Eleanor said, not a question. Jacob didn't look up. Granger's got a ledger, names, buyers, every bastard who thought they could own people. His thumb ran over the badge in his palm, the metal biting into his skin. I aim to make it public. Tommy coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and Jacob's hand stilled. The boy peered up at him with glassy eyes. Pa, you gonna shoot 'em all? The question hung in the air, too heavy for a child's voice. Jacob exhaled sharply, the ghost of a smirk tugging at his lips. Nah, Sprout. Just the ones that don't run fast enough. Eleanor's laugh was sudden, startled, a spark of lightness in the gloom. But it faded just as quick. And when the town turns on you, when they call you the outlaw instead of them. Jacob finally met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the firelight like twin embers. Let them. Truth's got a way of burning brighter than any badge. A gust of wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, smoke, but not from their hearth. Distant, intentional. Eleanor stiffened. They're coming. Jacob stood, holstering his revolver with a smooth motion. Good, saves me the ride. Outside, the first shouts echoed up the trail. Torches flickered between the trees, bobbing like hellfire. Granger's voice cut through the night, smug and slurred with whiskey. Carter, you're surrounded. Send out the woman and the brat, and maybe we'll make it quick. Tommy whimpered, clutching Eleanor's sleeve. Jacob crouched in front of him, pressing the cold badge into his small palm. Remember, Sprout, you're my prisoner. Play your part, and when I say now, you run like the devil's on your heels. The boy nodded, jaw set with a courage that belied his years. Jacob turned to Eleanor, his voice dropping to a whisper. Back tunnel, the one we dug for winter storage, leads to the old mine shaft. Her eyes widened. You knew this would happen. I hoped. He grinned, sudden and fierce. Always bet on a man's greed, Ellie. Granger couldn't resist, gloating. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Splinters flew. Jacob raised his voice loud enough to carry. All right, Granger, you win. He winked at Tommy. Now. As the boy bolted for the hidden trapdoor, Jacob kicked over the lantern. Flames roared up the cabin walls, painting his face in golden shadow. Outside, shouts turned to panic. Eleanor hesitated at the tunnel's mouth. Jacob, go, he ordered, tossing her the ledger he'd snatched from the scout's saddlebag. Tell the story, every damn page. Then he turned toward the burning door, Colt in hand badge, glinting on his chest like a joke only he understood. Granger's voice rose in a scream. Carter's gone mad. Jacob laughed low and dark as the first lawman burst through the flames. Nah, Marshal, just finally sane. The gunshot that followed was louder than the fire. The moon hung low over Red Creek, a pale witness to the chaos below. Jacob Carter crouched atop the mercantile roof, watching Granger pace like a caged wolf in the street. The man's fancy new boots, probably bought with blood money, kicked up dust as he screamed at the sheriff. You're telling me one man emptied our entire armory? Jacob smirked, adjusting the stolen deputy's hat on his head. The disguise was flimsy, but fear made men blind. He'd learned that the hard way. Below, the young sheriff, barely old enough to shave, flinched. Not just a man, sir. The mountain man. Folks say a lot of horse shit. Granger's fist connected with a water trough, sending pigeons scattering. I want every able body armed and searching. double the bounty. Jacob almost felt sorry for the kid. Almost. Then he remembered Tommy's feverish eyes, Eleanor's torn dress, the ledger entries that listed children by weight and condition. His fingers tightened around the matchbook in his pocket. A new voice cut through the tension, slick as oil twice as foul. Councilman Whitfield emerged from the saloon, his silk vest straining over a gut fed on graft. "Gentlemen, please. This is no time for theatrics." He patted Granger's shoulder like calming a rabid dog. "Our buyers are nervous. Let's reassure them with a demonstration." Granger's scowl deepened. "What kind of—" "Round up the remaining indentures," Whitfield purred. "Public auction at noon. Show the town we're not afraid of ghosts." Jacob's blood turned to ice. They were using his rebellion as a sales pitch. The gallows humor hit him, then sharp and sudden. He'd spent years hiding in the mountains thinking silence was strength. Turns out all it did was make room for louder liars. He dropped silently into the alley where a familiar figure waited Eli, the kid he'd spared now, clutching a rusty pistol. "See, Carter, I did like you said, but you're holding that gun like it's a rattlesnake," Jacob observed, plucking it from the boy's hands. "Here's lesson 1. Never point it at something you ain't willing to kill." He flipped the pistol, offering it back grip first. "You still want to be a lawman, Eli, or you want to be right?" The boy's Adam's apple bobbed. "They got my sister in the stockade." Jacob's smile was all teeth. "Then let's go be wrong together." Noon brought a crowd to the square, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Whitfield stood on the auction block, oozing charm as deputies herded a dozen shackled souls onto the platform. Jacob watched from the shadows, Eli at his side counting heartbeats. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitfield spread his arms. "Let this serve as proof that Red Creek honors its contracts." A gunshot split the air. The banner above the stage exploded into flames. Chaos erupted as Jacob strode forward, Deputy Eli beside him, both badges gleaming, both guns drawn. "Sorry I'm late," Jacob announced loud enough to carry over the screams. "Heard there was a going out of business sale." Whitfield gaped. You're supposed to be." Dead Jacob tipped his hat. "Turns out rumors are like laws around here. Easy to fake." He nodded to Eli, who hurled a burlap sack onto the stage. It split open, spilling ledgers across the boards. "These belong to the people. Names, prices, even a few receipts from your distinguished buyers." The crowd surged forward, grabbing pages. A woman shrieked. A man roared. Granger reached for his pistol, only to find Jacob's Colt already pressed to his temple. "Funny thing about fire," Jacob mused, watching the banner burn. "Once it starts, even rats have to choose burn or run." He cocked the hammer. "Pick fast." Some chose wrong. By sundown, Red Creek's indentures were free. Whitfield's mansion was ablaze, and Granger's body swung from the same gallows he'd built for others. Jacob stood at the town limits, watching the smoke rise. Eli hesitated beside him. What now? Now Jacob adjusted his hat, turning toward the mountains where his family waited. "We see if the world's learned its lesson." Behind them, the first copy of the ledgers was already being printed. Stories, after all, were harder to kill than men. The riders came at dawn, their horses kicking up mud from the spring thaw. Jacob Carter stood on the porch, rifle resting against his shoulder, watching the procession wind up the trail. There were more than he expected, not just Granger's deputies, but townsfolk too, their faces a mix of fear and something new, defiance. At the front rode Eli, the kid he'd spared now, sitting taller in the saddle. Beside him, a woman in a patched dress held a ledger aloft like a torch. "We brought the rest of the records," she shouted, her voice raw with triumph. "The whole damn town's seen him now." Granger and Barrett brought up the rear, their hands bound, faces bruised. Jacob's brow arched. "Well," he drawled, "looks like civilization came to collect its dues." Eli dismounted, tossing a burlap sack at Jacob's feet. It spilled open, revealing a jumble of badges, sheriff's stars, council pins, even Granger's prize marshal insignia. Turns out the kid said folks don't take kindly to finding their kin's names in a slave ledger. Jacob crouched, picking up Barrett's gold-chased pocket watch. "Funny. Thought you believed in law and order." Barrett's lip curled. "This isn't over, Carter. Men like me end up face down in creeks," Jacob finished, tossing the watch back. "Ask Granger." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. The sound was unfamiliar here in these mountains where silence had reigned too long. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, Tommy balanced on her hip. The boy's fever had broken his eyes clear for the first time in days. "Pa," he whispered, "did we win?" Jacob scooped him up, studying the ragtag army before them. Miners with pickaxes, Shopkeepers with hunting rifles, even the saloon girl who'd spat in Granger's face. Nah, Sprout, he said, ruffling the boy's hair. We just got started. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter apple blossoms from the valley below. Spring, real spring, not the gilded lie Red Creek had sold. Eli cleared his throat. Town's holding elections next week. They're asking if you'll run for sheriff. Jacob's laugh boomed across the ridge, startling a raven from its perch. Me lawman. He glanced at Eleanor, who rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. Tell him I'm busy, doing what Eli asked. Tommy piped up, planting apple trees. Jacob nodded solemnly. Man's got to have priorities. As the crowd laughed, Granger's glare could have curdled milk. You'll regret this, Carter. Men like us. Die old in bed, Jacob interrupted, or young in the dirt. He tipped his hat. Guess which one you are. The riders turned back toward town, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. Behind them, the cabin door creaked shut, not in fear, but in quiet certainty. Some battles ended. Others just changed shape. Jacob Carter had come down the mountain for medicine. What he found instead was something rarer, a future worth fighting for. And as Tommy's laughter echoed through the pines, he figured that was remedy enough. The deputy's hand hovered over his pistol fingers, twitching like a nervous gambler's. Jacob Carter didn't flinch. From his perch on the boulder, the rifle's sight painted a perfect circle on Granger's forehead. Easy now, boys, Jacob drawled, voice dripping with mock concern. That paper in your pocket gonna stop bullets. Granger's smile was thin as razor wire. This is a deed, Carter, signed by the territorial governor. Your land belongs to Red Creek now. Progress waits for no man. A laugh rumbled from Jacob's chest, dark, unamused. Funny, I don't recall selling. Don't need you to, Granger said, unfolding the document with theatrical flair. Eminent domain. For the railroad. Railroad. Jacob's eyebrow arched. Closest tracks 200 miles east. Was Granger corrected? Till the Silver Bend Consortium bought rights. You're sitting on the main road. The revelation hit like a gut punch. This wasn't just about people anymore. It was about steel and steam, the kind of money that made men disappear. Jacob's finger tightened on the trigger. Then a child's voice. Pa. Tommy stood in the cabin doorway, clutching Eleanor's skirt, his eyes wide. The sight froze the clearing. Granger's smirk returned. Ah, the heir apparent. Jacob's blood turned to ice. Here's how this works. Granger continued, smooth as snake oil. You walk away quietly, we forget the arson, the theft. The boy keeps his name instead of becoming a ward of the state. He tapped the deed. Or we do this the hard way. Your choice. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind in the pines. Then, you're right, Jacob lowered his rifle. It is my choice. He whistled sharp as a hawk's cry. The trees erupted. 20 armed miners burst from the tree line, rifles leveled. Eli led them, his borrowed sheriff's star gleaming. Heard there was a railroad needing built, Jacob said, stepping down from the boulder. Figured we'd unionize. Granger's face went slack. This is madness, you can't. Actually, Eleanor cut in, emerging from the cabin with a shotgun. The land grant says mineral rights stay with the homesteader. And guess what we found digging? Tommy's well last week, she tossed a rock at Granger's feet. It split open, revealing a vein of silver bright as betrayal. Jacob scooped up the deed, tearing it slowly in half. Tell your consortium something for me, he said, watching the paper flutter to the ground like a dying bird. The only steel coming through this pass will be my plow. As the deputies scrambled for their horses, Tommy darted forward, snatching Granger's fancy hat. The man lunged only to find Jacob's Colt pressed to his ribs. Keep the hat, Sprout, Jacob murmured, never breaking eye contact with Granger. Makes a fine chamber pot. The miners' laughter chased the lawmen down the mountain, a sound sweeter than any railroad whistle. That night, as fireflies danced over the newly claimed silver vein, Jacob carved one last mark into the cabin's doorframe. Not a warning this time, but a promise. The Carters weren't just surviving anymore. They were home. The child's shoe sat on the table like an accusation, its tiny laces limp against the rough wood. Jacob Carter ran a calloused finger along its edge, imagining the boy or girl who'd lost it, probably some miner's kid, some nobody's child chosen, because they wouldn't be missed. They're getting creative, he muttered. Eleanor slammed the kettle onto the stove hard enough to rattle the tin cups. Creative. They're monsters. Tommy curled in the corner with a blanket, and the last of the yarrow tea piped up. Monsters ain't real, Ma. Jacob met his son's fever-bright eyes. Oh, they're real, Sprout. Just wear fancy coats instead of scales. He turned to Eleanor, lowering his voice. You sure about this town's a powder keg right now? She stuffed a revolver into her apron pocket, the one she'd taken from Granger's unconscious deputy last week. You taught me to shoot. Time I earned my keep. The cabin door creaked open before Jacob could argue. Eli stood on the threshold, breathless, his shirt splattered with what looked like ink. They took the Cooper twins, he gasped. Right off their porch, Marshall's calling it debt collection, but everyone knows. It's a message. Jacob finished strapping on his gun belt. The leather felt heavier than usual. Eleanor snatched the stolen ledger from the shelf, her mouth set in a grim line. Then we send one back. Red Creek at high noon looked like a town waiting for the gallows to drop. The streets were too quiet, the saloon doors still. Even the church bell hung silent. Jacob led them down back alleys past the butcher's, where he'd worked as a boy, past the empty schoolhouse that now served as a debtor's jail. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd left this town to escape its ghosts, only to march back in with an army of two. The marshal's office loomed ahead, its new brass plaque gleaming in the sun, Territorial Justice Bureau. Jacob snorted. Fancy name for a whipping post. Eleanor gripped his arm. Jacob, the window. Behind the barred glass, two small faces peered out, the Cooper boys, no older than Tommy, their cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. A deputy leaned against the wall beside them, chewing tobacco like this was just another Tuesday. Jacob's vision went red at the edges. Stay here, he told Eleanor. Like hell, she hissed, marching straight for the door. What happened next would be told in taverns for years. Eleanor Carter, in her flour-dusted apron, kicked open the marshal's office door and announced, "Y'all are terrible at math." She slammed the ledger onto the desk, its pages fluttering open, to reveal columns of falsified debts. According to this, my husband owes $800 for a mule that died in 1862. The deputy spat tobacco juice at her feet. Ain't your concern, woman. Funny. Jacob stepped inside, Colt drawn. Seems like you're real concerned about her mule. The standoff might have ended in blood if Tommy hadn't chosen that moment to dart through the door, his small hands clutching a fistful of wildflowers. For the prisoners, he declared, shoving them at the stunned Cooper boys. The deputy blinked. What in the... Innocent until proven guilty, Jacob said smoothly, nudging the man's rifle aside with his boot. That's the law, ain't it? A crowd had gathered outside, murmuring. Someone shouted, "Let him go!" Another voice, Eli's, yelled, "The whole ledger's fake." The deputy wavered. Granger's system was crumbling, and he knew it. Eleanor pressed her advantage, snatching the keys from his belt. Tell Granger something, she said sweetly as she freed the boys. The Carters pay their debts, just not his kind. That night, as the reunited Cooper family wept outside the jail, Jacob watched the stars emerge over Red Creek. The town wasn't saved, not yet, but for the first time in years, it had hope. Tommy tugged his sleeve. Pa, did we win again? Jacob ruffled his hair. Nah, Sprout. We just gave the monsters something new to fear. Eleanor's laughter rang clear in the cold air, mingling with the distant howl of a wolf, or maybe just the wind. Either way, it sounded like freedom. The northern valleys welcomed them with crisp air and golden aspens, their new cabins smaller than the old one, but sturdier, built with salvaged timber and the kind of quiet hope that follows storms. Jacob Carter split firewood under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, while Tommy Stronger, now his cough, just a memory, chased chipmunks through the fallen leaves. Eleanor emerged from the smokehouse, wiping her hands on her apron. Mail came, she said, tossing him a yellowed envelope. The return address made his stomach clench. Red Creek Gazette. Open it, she urged, watching his face. Inside was a newspaper clipping its edges, frayed from passing through too many hands. The headline blared, "Indenture system abolished, council disbanded." Below it, a smaller line, "Former Marshal Granger found dead in Denver, suicide suspected." Jacob exhaled sharply. Guess he couldn't outrun his ghosts. Eleanor plucked the paper from his fingers, her mouth twisting. They spelled your name wrong. Calls you Jonah Carter. Perfect. Jacob sank onto the porch steps, the weight of the past months settling in his bones. Let him forget. Easier that way. Tommy barreled into his legs, clutching a fistful of wildflowers. For the table, Pa, like the Coopers taught me. Jacob ruffled his hair. That single act of kindness the flowers given to those frightened boys had done more to unravel Red Creek than all his bullets and burned ledgers combined. Speaking of, Eleanor nodded toward the trail. A familiar figure approached Eli now, sporting a sheriff's star and leading a pack horse laden with supplies. "Heard you folks could use some coffee," he called. "And before you ask, no, I ain't staying. Just delivering justice, and maybe a pie." Eleanor's eyes lit up at the mention of baked goods. "You're learning, boy." As Eli unpacked sacks of flour and sugar, he lowered his voice. "Town's different now. Got a proper schoolhouse. Even elected a woman to the new council." He glanced at Tommy, who was busy inspecting the pie. They call you the Ghost of Granite Pass in the papers." Jacob snorted. "Ghosts don't split wood or change diapers." "Yeah, well," Eli mounted up, tipping his hat. "Maybe that's the point." They watched him ride away until the trees swallowed him whole. The wind carried the scent of Eleanor's rosemary bushes and the distant cry of a hawk. "Ghost," Jacob muttered, shaking his head. He pulled Tommy onto his lap, the boy's laughter warm against his chest. "Ain't no ghosts here, Sprout. Just folks too stubborn to quit." And as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the valley in quiet white, Jacob Carter did something he hadn't done in years. He sat still. The mountains watched over them, old and patient, their peaks etched against the twilight like a promise. Somewhere to the south, Red Creek would keep spinning its stories. But here was something better. Here was home. The rider's gloved hand rested on his saddle horn, his breath curling in the cold air like gun smoke. Jacob Carter studied him, the tailored coat, the polished spurs, the way his horse stood unnaturally still. This wasn't some two-bit enforcer. This was the kind of man who made governors nervous. "Efficient," Jacob repeated, rolling the word around like a rotten tooth. "That what you call it when they put prices on children?" Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Tommy peered out, clutching his wooden toy horse. "Pa-Ma says breakfast is inside, Sprout." Jacob didn't turn around. "Close the door." The rider's gaze flickered to the boy, then back to Jacob. Ah, the air. His smile was thin as a knife wound. "My employers would pay handsomely for those documents. Enough to give him a proper education, a future." Jacob's laugh was sudden and harsh, startling a raven from the nearby pines. "Funny. Last man who offered me money for my son ended up feeding coyotes." The rider sighed as if disappointed by a poor hand at cards. "Mr. Carter, you're a relic. The West is being civilized. Men like you built it," Jacob finished. His thumb eased the rifle's hammer back with an audible click. "Now get off my land before I civilize that fancy coat with lead." For the first time, the rider's composure cracked just a twitch at his temple. "You're making a mistake." "Nah." Jacob spat into the dirt. "Mistake was you thinking I'd negotiate with the devil just 'cause he sent a well-dressed messenger." The standoff stretched, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Then, with exaggerated slowness, the rider tugged his gloves tighter. "Winter's coming, Carter. Even wolves den up eventually." He turned his horse, pausing just long enough to add, "My employers keep their receipts, every name, every transaction. Sleep well." As the black-clad figure vanished into the trees, Eleanor emerged, her shotgun peeking from beneath her shawl. That one smelled like banker and bloodshed. Jacob exhaled sharply. Worse. The kind of man who buys both. Tommy tugged at his sleeve. "Pa, what did he want?" Jacob scooped him up, pressing his nose into the boy's hair. "Still sweet with sleep, still innocent of the world's rot. Nothing we ain't willing to burn, Sprout." That night, as the first snow whispered against the roof, Jacob spread the stolen ledgers across the table. Names glared up at him in ink, powerful men in distant cities, their greed wrapped in legal parchment. Eleanor set a lantern beside them, her reflection flickering in the glass like a vengeful spirit. "We can't run forever," she said quietly. Jacob struck a match, watching the flame dance. Who said anything about running? Outside, the wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine and gunpowder. Somewhere to the south, the machine of greed still turned. But here in this quiet cabin at the edge of the wild, a different kind of fire was stirring. And Jacob Carter. He'd always been good with fire. Jacob froze mid-step, his boot hovering above a dry twig. The sound came again, a rhythmic crunch of pine needles, too precise for wildlife. Moonlight filtered through the trees, painting silver stripes across the forest floor. He exhaled slowly, letting his rifle hang loose at his side. "Come on out, you bastard." A shadow detached itself from the blackness between two pines. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the lazy confidence of a grizzly. The glint of a sawed-off shotgun peeked from beneath the man's oilskin duster. "Evening, Carter." The voice was gravel wrapped in velvet. "Heard you been giving bankers nightmares." Jacob's finger brushed the trigger. "Bobby Cole." Last I heard, you were rotting in a Texas prison. The big man chuckled, stepping into a shaft of moonlight. His face was a roadmap of scars, the most recent still pink above his eyebrow. Got early release on account of my charm. He spat a stream of tobacco juice. And my new employer's deep pockets. Jacob's gut tightened. Cole wasn't just a killer. He was the kind who enjoyed receipts. They sent you to collect. Nah. Cole's shotgun remained pointed at the ground, but his thumb rested on the hammer. Sent me to negotiate. See, them fancy boys don't understand folks like us. Think money solves everything. He grinned, revealing a gold-capped tooth. But you and me, we know some debts only get settled one way. A twig snapped to Jacob's left. Another shadow shifted. Shit. They'd flanked him. Cole's grin widened. Now I respect a man who stands his ground. So here's my offer, hand over them ledgers, and I'll make it quick for the woman and boy. I'll let you walk away. Hell might even shake your hand. Jacob's laugh was colder than the mountain air. That's supposed to scare me, Bobby. I've seen you miss a shot at 10 paces. The grin vanished. That was when you were sober. Jacob tilted his head. Smell like a distillery now. A beat of silence. Then Cole roared with laughter. God damn, I missed you, Carter. He wiped his eyes, then sobered abruptly. Shame I gotta kill you. The forest exploded. Jacob dove left as Cole's shotgun boomed pellets shredding bark where he'd stood. He rolled, came up firing, not at Cole, but at the second shadow. The man screamed, clutching his thigh. Should have stayed in Texas. Bobby Jacob sprinted between the trees, bullets chewing the earth at his heels. Cole's bellow followed him. You can't run forever. Jacob didn't plan to. He burst into the clearing where their hidden lean-to stood empty. Good. Eleanor knew the plan. Another gunshot echoed closer this time. Jacob grinned savagely. Let them come. The ledger pages rustled in his pack. Every name, every transaction. The truth was his weapon now. And Jacob Carter. He'd always been good with truth. Somewhere in the trees, Tommy's voice piped up. Pa says you smell like a skunk rolled in whiskey. Cole's enraged scream shook the pines. Jacob cocked his revolver. The hunt was on. The dawn mist clung to Jacob's coat like ghostly fingers as he tightened the saddle cinch one last time. Tommy stood barefoot in the dew, clutching his father's leg with small, desperate hands. Take me with you, the boy whispered, his voice cracking in a way that made Jacob's ribs ache. Jacob knelt, pressing his forehead to his son's. Someone's got to protect your ma, he murmured, and you're the only man I trust with the job. Tommy sniffed and squared his shoulders with all the gravity a 6-year-old could muster. I'll shoot 'em all if they come back. Attaboy. Jacob ruffled his hair before turning to Eleanor. She stood ramrod straight, her shotgun slung across her back like a vengeance-minded angel. The folded cloth she'd given him burned in his breast pocket, a name, an ally, maybe a trap. Harrow's End's a 3-day ride, he said quietly. If I'm not back by the new moon, I'll assume you're dead and go raise hell myself. Eleanor finished, her eyes glinting harder than the rifle barrel at Jacob's hip. Now quit stalling. The West won't burn itself down. Jacob swung into the saddle, casting one last look at the lean-to hidden in the pines, at the woman who'd traded her apron for ammunition, at the boy who'd already seen too much. Keep the home fires burning, he said, and kicked his horse into a gallop before his heart could change his mind. The plains gave way to scrubland, then to the skeletal remains of a failed mining town. Jacob rode through its corpse at midnight, the moon painting the abandoned saloon sign in eerie silver, Westwood Mercantile. Est, 1872. The company's mark was everywhere, on rusted plows, on the boarded-up schoolhouse, even stamped into the crumbling bricks of the jail. A coyote yipped in the distance. Jacob's hand drifted to his revolver. That's far enough, Carter. The voice came from the saloon's shadowed porch. A figure stepped forward, lean as a whip, his face obscured by a hat pulled low. Heard you might come this way. Jacob kept his grip loose, ready. You the welcoming committee. The man chuckled, lifting his chin to reveal a familiar scar running through his eyebrow. Eli, the kid from Red Creek, older now, and wearing a different kind of star on his vest. More like the cleanup crew. Westwood owns the sheriff in these parts, so I quit wearing the badge. He jerked his thumb toward the horizon. Harrow's End's worse. Got their own private army. Electric fences. Even a damn telegraph straight to Chicago. Jacob dismounted slowly. You here to stop me? Nah. Eli spat into the dust. I'm here to give you this. He tossed Jacob a brass key, its teeth worn smooth. Fits the back gate. And the name your wife gave you, that'd be Mary Sims. Works in the records room. Hates Westwood more than you do. Why, they indentured her daughter last spring. Eli's jaw tightened. Girl was 12. The fire in Jacob's gut burned hotter. He pocketed the key. You coming? Can't. Eli nodded toward the east where a lone rider approached. Got my own mess to handle. But Carter. He met Jacob's eyes. Burn it all. 3 nights later, Jacob crouched in the reeds outside Harrow's End's electrified fence. The compound hummed like a beehive, guards patrolling telegraph wires, buzzing the distant clang of the stockade gate. Mary Sims's directions had been precise. Wait for the shift change. Look for the red lantern. Right on cue, a crimson glow flickered in a third-story window. Jacob moved like smoke through the shadows, Eli's key turning smoothly in the lock. The records room smelled of ink and desperation, floor-to-ceiling shelves groaning under the weight of human misery. Mary stood by the window, her face gone in the lamplight. You're late, she whispered, handing him a stack of files. These are the originals, the ones they can't replicate. Jacob hefted the papers, thousands of names, thousands of stolen lives. Where's the vault? Basement. Her smile was razor-thin, guarded by a man who thinks little girls are currency. Jacob checked his revolver. Lead the way. As they descended the stairs, the building shuddered, not from gunfire, but from the distant whistle of an approaching train. Mary's eyes widened. That's the Chicago Express. They're transferring the backup ledgers tonight. Jacob's grin was all teeth. Perfect. He tossed her his matches. Start upstairs, I'll handle the basement. The first guard died without a sound. The second managed a choked scream before Jacob silenced him with a bullet between the eyes. By the time he reached the vault, a cast-iron monstrosity stamped with the Westwood logo, the upper floors were already crackling with flames. Mary's voice echoed down the stairwell, Jacob the train. He turned just as the Chicago Express pulled into the station, its gleaming cars reflecting the growing inferno. Through the smoke, a figure in a tailored suit stumbled onto the platform, clutching a briefcase. The man from the clearing, the rider. Jacob raised his revolver, then paused. Let him run. Let him tell his masters how their empire fell. The explosion shook the ground as the fire reached the ammunition stores. Jacob sprinted for the stables as Harrow's End burned behind him, the heat searing his back, the wind carrying the ashes of 1,000 contracts into the night. Somewhere to the west, Tommy would be watching the horizon, waiting for the glow of distant fire. And Jacob Carter, he'd be home by dawn. Jacob Carter blended into the gray-coated crowd like a wolf among sheep, his borrowed company pin glinting dully in the gaslight. The stench of coal smoke and sweat clung to Harrow's End like a sickness. He kept his steps measured, his gaze downcast, just another faceless cog in Westwood's machine. Then he saw her, a girl no older than Tommy, hauling a bucket of water twice her size, her wrists raw from rope burns. Her eyes, hollow as a starved coyote's, flickered to his for half a heartbeat before skittering away. You! Jacob caught the arm of a passing graycoat. That child. What's her debt? The man snorted. Ain't got one. Orphan stock. Company property since birth. He jerked free, eyeing Jacob's unfamiliar face. You knew Section 4's got the breeding charts if you're looking to bid. Jacob's fingers twitched toward his revolver. Just making conversation. The gray coat shrugged and vanished into the crowd, leaving Jacob standing there, his blood roaring in his ears. Breeding charts. The words curdled in his gut like spoiled milk. Midnight found him crouched on the vault's slate roof, Eli's key cold in his palm. The guards below chatted about some Chicago bigwig arriving tomorrow, gonna inspect the new shipment, their voices floating up through the vents. A rustle, a shadow. Mary Sims materialized beside him, her face drawn tight. Change of plans, she whispered. They're moving the master ledgers at dawn, whole vaults being emptied for the inspector. Jacob's pulse kicked. Where? Train to Chicago, but... Her grin was feral. The backup copies stay here, in the furnace room. The vents exhaled a breath of warm, paper-scented air. Somewhere below, thousands of lives were reduced to ink and numbers. Jacob pictured Tommy's face, Eleanor's hands the way their cabin smelled of pine resin and wild onions. Burn it, he said. Mary pressed a matchbox into his hand. Already stocked the furnace with kerosene. Just mind them. A shout cut her off. Boots pounded on iron stairs. Go. Jacob shoved her toward the fire escape. Get your daughter and run. The explosion lit up the Harrow's End skyline like a second sunrise. Jacob rode through the chaos with his collar turned up against the heat, the company horse galloping flat out toward the western hills. Behind him, the vault's iron skeleton glowed red-hot, its precious contents swirling into the night like a blizzard of blackened confetti. A bullet whined past his ear. Company men poured from the barracks, their shouts drowned by the wail of the fire alarm. Jacob grinned into the wind. Let them come. Let them chase ghosts. Somewhere ahead, beyond the rail lines and the dying plains, a boy with his mother's eyes would be watching the horizon. Waiting. And Jacob Carter, he'd be home before the ashes settled. The Westwood Securities Holding Division would file an insurance claim by week's end. They'd rebuild their vault restock, their ledgers pretend nothing had changed. But out in the wild places, where the wind carried the scent of burning greed, and the last free men still breathed, a different story would spread of how one man with a match and a mountain of rage had made the devil's bookkeeping go up in smoke. And that was a receipt no court could dispute. The warden's key turned with a satisfying clunk, but Jacob's hand hovered over his own. Something about the man's posture, too stiff, too alert, set his nerves humming. After you, Mr. Ward, the warden said, stepping aside with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jacob's gut screamed trap. He played along, descending the iron stairs with measured steps. The basement air smelled of mildew and something sharper, kerosene. His fingers brushed the matchbox in his pocket. At the bottom, the vault door gleamed under flickering gaslight. The warden inserted his key. Strange, he mused. Samuel Ward usually smells of bay rum. You smell like gunpowder and bad decisions. Jacob froze. Also, the warden continued, the real Ward's been dead 6 months. Drank himself into an early grave after approving too many child indenture transfers. He turned, revealing a derringer hidden in his palm. Company thought it was guilt. I knew better. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Jacob twisted, feeling the bullet graze his ribs as he tackled the warden. They crashed into the vault door, the man's keys skittering across the stone floor. You're smarter than you look, Jacob grunted, driving a knee into the warden's gut. And you're exactly as stupid as you look, the warden wheezed, clawing at Jacob's stolen uniform. That explosion at the furnace room. That was your woman, Sims. Guards caught her halfway to the train yard. Jacob's blood turned to ice. Mary. The warden seized his hesitation, flipping them with surprising strength. They're hanging her at dawn, he spat. After they make her watch what we do to her. Jacob's fist cut him off mid-sentence, crunching bone. The warden slumped unconscious. Panting, Jacob snatched the fallen keys. The vault door swung open with a groan, revealing shelves upon shelves of leather-bound ledgers, each one thicker than a Bible, each page crammed with names and numbers that represented stolen lives. At the center stood an ancient oak desk. On it, a single volume bound in human skin or so. The rumors said its pages yellowed with age, the master ledger. Jacob struck a match. The explosion upstairs had been a distraction. This was the kill shot. As flames licked up the first shelf, a commotion erupted above shouting, running footsteps. Jacob grabbed the master ledger and bolted up the stairs, bursting into the main chamber, just as a dozen gray coats skidded to a halt. Fire, he bellowed in his best bureaucratic panic. The archives are compromised. Chaos erupted. Clerks scrambled for buckets. Guards tripped over each other. In the confusion, Jacob slipped out the back door, straight into the path of a wide-eyed Mary Sims, her dress torn but very much alive. You're supposed to be hanged, she flashed a grin, hefting a stolen rifle. Turns out Westwood's hangman takes bribes. Behind her, the orphan girl from earlier peeked out, clutching a lit lantern twice her size. Jacob's laugh was half relief, half madness. Remind me never to bet against you. The three of them melted into the night as Harrow's End burned behind them. First the vault, then the depot, then the company store. By dawn, the entire town would be ash. Somewhere to the west, a boy with his father's stubborn chin would hear the rumors. The ghost of Granite Pass struck again. And Jacob Carter, he'd be home in time for breakfast. The master ledger made excellent kindling. The cabin smelled of pine resin and fresh-baked bread when Jacob finally crossed the threshold. Tommy launched himself at his father's legs, small hands clutching at soot-stained trousers. Pa, you missed the wolf. Jacob scooped him up, wincing as the boy's elbow brushed his burned palm. What wolf sprout? Big one. Came right up to the porch. Tommy's eyes shone with excitement. Ma said not to shoot 'cause it had babies hiding in the trees. Eleanor met Jacob's gaze over their son's head, her shotgun leaning against the doorframe. The unspoken message was clear. Even the wolves are watching now. That night, as the fire crackled and Tommy snored softly in the loft, Jacob spread the smuggler's train schedule across the table. "We could be in Canada by spring," he murmured, tracing the route with a calloused finger. Eleanor sipped her tea, her face unreadable. "Running. Living," Jacob corrected. He nodded toward Tommy's sleeping form. "He deserves more than looking over his shoulder at every shadow." A log shifted in the hearth, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, or maybe it was a wolf. Maybe both. "Harrow's End burned," Jacob continued, "but Westwood's got long arms and longer memories." Eleanor set her cup down with deliberate calm. "So we cut off the arms." She reached beneath the table and produced a battered ledger, one Jacob didn't recognize. "Grant gave me this before you left. Copies of every Chicago buyer's name, every senator taking kickbacks, every judge on their payroll." Jacob's breath caught. The real master list. "Mail one page to every newspaper between here and the Mississippi." Eleanor said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. "Let the world see how their civilized West was built." Dawn found Jacob at the ridge again, watching the valley below. The first snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the land in pristine white. Beautiful. Deceptive. A twig snapped behind him. "You're getting slow, Carter." Eli emerged from the trees leading a string of pack mules laden with supplies. "Heard you might need these." He jerked his thumb at the cargo rifle's ammunition and oddly a crate of books. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Planning a war or a schoolhouse?" "Both." Eli grinned. "Turns out folks get real motivated when they learn their grandma's farm was stolen by paperwork." He handed Jacob a newspaper. The headline blared, "Westwood Scandal Rocks Capital. Investigations demanded." Jacob's laugh echoed across the mountainside. "Eleanor's work." "Nah." Eli's grin turned feral. "That'd be Mary Sims. Girl's got a talent for arson and politics." The winter passed in a strange peace. Newspapers arrived sporadically, each one filled with fresh Westwood scandals. The company's stock plummeted, senators resigned, and somewhere in Chicago, a boardroom full of rich men learned an old lesson. You can buy land, you can buy laws, but you can't buy silence from the mountains. Spring came early that year. Jacob stood on the porch watching Tommy chase butterflies through the meadow, his laughter ringing clear as church bells. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe beside him, her belly just beginning to swell with new life. "Still want to run north?" she asked softly. Jacob took her hand, pressing it to his lips. "Nah," he murmured. "I think we're done running." Behind them, the cabin door stood open, not in fear, but in welcome. The wilderness stretched out before them, vast and untamed. And Jacob Carter, he was exactly where he belonged. Jacob pressed his palm flat against the quarry floor, the vibrations turning his bones into tuning forks. Too many horses, too organized. Westwood wasn't sending hired guns this time, they were sending an army. Tommy tugged his sleeve, his whisper frantic. "Paw the cave's back wall." "Not now, Sprout." Jacob's rifle was already in his hands. "But there's a ton of ignorance. Jacob." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She stood at the cave mouth, her silhouette framed by the last bloody light of sunset. The boy found something. The something turned out to be a rusted iron door set into the cave's rear wall, its hinges camouflaged by decades of mineral deposits. Tommy's small hands had uncovered the seams while scratching his name in the soot. "Blasting tunnel," Jacob murmured, running his fingers over the rivets. "Miners dug these to move ore. Leads straight to the old rail spur." Eleanor's eyes met his in the flickering lantern light. "Westwood won't know it exists." A plan crystallized in Jacob's mind, reckless and perfect. He dropped to one knee before Tommy. "You remember that game we played, the one with the lanterns and the rope?" The boy nodded, suddenly solemn. "Good." Jacob pressed his forehead to his son's. "Time to play it for real." The company riders reached the quarry at moonrise, their torches painting the cliffs in hellish orange. 20 men at least, armed with the latest repeating rifles money could buy. At their head rode a figure in a tailored coat, the same slick messenger from months before, his gloves spotless despite the dust. "Carter." His voice echoed off the stone walls. "We have the ridge. The passes come out now and we'll make it quick for the boy." Silence. Then a child's laughter, high and clear, drifting from the cave mouth. The riders exchanged glances. The leader dismounted, drawing a pearl-handled revolver, flushed them out. They advanced in formation, boots crunching on loose shale. The first man through the cave entrance tripped the wire Tommy had strung at knee height. The explosion wasn't loud, just enough to bring down the tunnel entrance in a roar of dust and splintered rock. God damn it! The leader whirled, scanning the cliffs. They're still here, fan out. That's when the real fireworks started. One by one, the supply packs on the riders' horses erupted in fountains of sparks, courtesy of Eli's borrowed signal flares rigged to trip wires Tommy had woven through the brush. Panicked horses bolted. Men shouted. The quarry became a chaos of rearing silhouettes and wild gunfire. From his perch on the eastern ridge, Jacob watched through his rifle scope as the leader scrambled behind a boulder straight into Eleanor's waiting shotgun. "Evening," she said sweetly. "Heard you were looking for us." The man's glove slipped on his fancy pistol. "Mrs. Carter, Oh, I'm not the one you need to worry about." She stepped aside, revealing Jacob standing behind her, his face carved from shadow and vengeance. The company man's scream didn't last long. Dawn found the Carter family miles north, following the abandoned railbed through a canyon painted gold by sunrise. Tommy rode ahead on a captured company horse, giggling as he fed it sugar cubes. "Think they'll keep coming?" Eleanor asked, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Jacob adjusted the pack containing what remained of Westwood's master ledger, the pages they'd saved, the names they'd protect. "Oh, they'll come." He nodded to the horizon where storm clouds gathered over the distant peaks. "But so will the winter. And he squeezed her hand. "We know how to survive." The wind carried the scent of pine and promise as they rode into the wild unknown, not as fugitives, but as something far more dangerous. A family with nothing left to lose. And Jacob Carter, he wouldn't have it any other way. The ghosts came at twilight, first as shadows between the pines, then as solid figures around the campfire. A one-legged miner with a Sharps rifle across his lap. A Shawnee woman with a bounty poster nailed to her belt. Two rail workers whose missing fingers told their own story. They sat in silence, passing a jug of something that smelled like turpentine and bad decisions. Tommy, now more wolf cub than boy, crouched by the fire, turning a rabbit on a spit. "Ain't you scared?" he asked the Shawnee woman, eyeing her knife collection. She grinned, gold teeth glinting. "Scared's what they want us to be, nada. That's why we ain't." Jacob studied the ragtag assembly. Westwood's bringing in Pinkertons. 30, maybe more. The one-legged miner spat into the flames. "Heard they got a Gatling gun." Had one, corrected a voice from the dark. Eli emerged, leading a mule piled with crates. "Till some fool left it unattended near my dynamite stash." He dropped a heavy bolt-action rifle into Jacob's lap. "Happy Christmas." The ambush site chose itself a narrow pass, where the railroad curved around Dead Man's Bluff. Jacob positioned the sharpshooters on the ridges, while Eli rigged the tracks with enough explosives to wake the dead. Eleanor and Tommy waited in the trees with the horses, their job simple. If this goes sideways, ride north and don't look back. The company train appeared right on schedule, its black engine puffing like a preening banker. Through his scope, Jacob counted 20 Pinkertons lounging on the flat cars, their shiny new badges catching the sun. Amateurs, muttered the Shawnee woman, sighting her rifle. The explosion lifted the lead car clean off the tracks. Before the dust settled, Jacob's bullet took the engineer between the shoulders. Chaos erupted as Pinkerton scrambled for cover straight into the crossfire. It was over in minutes. Jacob approached the sole survivor, a baby-faced guard trembling behind a shattered crate. "How old are you, kid?" 16, the boy stammered. "Christ," Jacob tossed him a canteen. "Tell your bosses something for me." He gestured to the burning train, the dead mercenaries, the ghosts melting back into the trees. "This ain't a war, it's an eviction notice." News of the attack spread faster than the railroad ever could. By spring, Westwood stock crashed. By summer, Congress launched an investigation. And by the time the first snow fell again, the Carter family stood on the porch of a new cabin, this one built with salvaged railroad ties and the bones of broken contracts. Tommy chased fireflies through the meadow, his laughter echoing off the mountains. Inside, Eleanor hummed as she rocked their newborn daughter by the fire. Jacob leaned against the doorframe, watching the sunset paint the peaks in gold and crimson. The wilderness stretched before them, vast and untamed. And the ghosts, they weren't ghosts anymore. They were neighbors. Jacob Carter took a deep breath of pine-scented air and did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled. The spring thaw brought more than just rushing streams. It carried rumors down from the high country like meltwater. Jacob Carter's name became a whispered promise in mining camps, a curse in company boardrooms. By the time the first wildflowers pushed through the mountain soil, the rebellion had taken on a life of its own. Eli arrived at the new cabin one evening with a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. He dumped its contents onto the table with a metallic clatter, dozens of Westwood badges, each one bent or bullet-pierced. Tokens of appreciation, he said, grinning, from grateful folks along the rail line. Eleanor sorted through them with the tip of her knife. This one's from Silver Bend. This, she held up a dented star, came all the way from Dakota Territory. Tommy, now sporting a man's knife at his belt, but still a boy at heart, peered at the collection. "We gonna melt 'em down, make bullets?" "Nah, Sprout." Jacob ruffled his hair. "We'll plant 'em, let 'em grow into something better." The company's response came not with guns, but paper. A broadsheet nailed to every post office from St. Louis to Sacramento. $10,000 reward for proof of Jacob Carter's demise by order of Westwood Securities. Mary Sims, now running a printing press in the ruins of Harrow's End, sent a copy wrapped around a brick of black powder. Her note was succinct. "They're scared." Jacob read it by firelight, Tommy asleep against his shoulder. Eleanor arched an eyebrow. 10,000. That's insultingly low. I know, Jacob deadpanned. "Last week I was worth at least 15. Their laughter startled an owl from the rafters. Summer brought a different kind of war. Not with bullets, but ballots. The ghosts, now calling themselves the Thorn Brigade, systematically undermined Westwood's operations. Payroll wagons went missing. Mine inspectors found their reports rewritten. Entire work crews vanished overnight, reappearing as homesteaders on disputed land. The final blow came unexpectedly. A company accountant named Pritchard, a man who'd never held a gun, delivered the masterstroke. He walked into the Denver Gazette with ledgers proving Westwood had been skimming pensions. The resulting scandal toppled 3 congressmen. When the Pinkertons came for Pritchard, they found Jacob waiting on his porch, a shotgun across his lap. "Boys," he said, sipping his coffee, "you're about 20 revolutions too late." Autumn found the Carter family harvesting their first real crop, not just corn and squash, but something more precious: safety. Tommy knelt in the dirt, carefully arranging his collection of Westwood badges around a young apple tree. "This one's for Grandpa," he murmured, patting the soil. "This one's for the Cooper boys." Eleanor, her belly round with new life, leaned against Jacob as they watched. "We won," she said quietly. Jacob shook his head, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "Nah, we just planted the seeds." Somewhere to the east, the gears of industry still turned. Somewhere, men in fine suits still schemed. But here was something worth fighting for. And Jacob Carter, he was just getting started. The rebel camp materialized like morning mist, here one day gone, the next leaving only trampled grass and cold fire pits as evidence. Jacob moved through the makeshift shelters with Tommy at his heels, the boy's eyes wide at the sight of so many armed strangers. A woman with a miner's lamp strapped to her hat approached, her face lined with coal dust and determination. "Heard you're the reason my brother ain't swinging from a company gallows," she said, thrusting a jar of Applejack into Jacob's hands. "Ma'am," Jacob tipped his hat, "I just lit the match. Your brother did the burning." The camp erupted in laughter, a sound Jacob hadn't realized he'd missed. Eleanor found him later by the creek, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. "Mary's here," she said, nodding toward a cluster of tents. "Brought news from Chicago." Mary Sims sat cross-legged in the dirt, sketching maps in the soil with a stick. "Westwood splitting up," she announced without preamble. Board members turning on each other, their stocks worthless as Confederate money. Jacob's knife stilled, and the ledgers. Mary's grin was all teeth, printed in every newspaper from here to Boston. Even got a senator's mistress to read him aloud at some fancy ball. She tossed him a crumpled broadsheet. The Chicago Tribune's headline blared, "Westwood Scandal Rocks Capital. Indentured labor exposed." Tommy, peering over his father's shoulder, squinted at the small print. "What's embezzlement?" "Fancy word for stealing," Jacob said, ruffling his hair. "Which reminds me," he pulled a rusted Westwood badge from his pocket and handed it to the boy. "Plant this one by the creek. Let's see what grows." The attack came at dawn, but not from the company. A band of Pinkertons, real ones this time, not the green recruits they'd faced before, crept through the mist with military precision. Their leader, a grizzled veteran with a cavalry saber at his hip, kicked over the first tent with a snarl. "Carter, show yourself or we burn this rat's nest to the—" The Shawnee woman's arrow took him through the throat. Chaos erupted. Gunfire, screams, the metallic tang of blood mixing with gunpowder. Jacob fought his way toward Tommy's last position, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found the boy crouched behind a fallen log, not cowering, but loading a revolver twice the size of his hand. Pa, Tommy whispered, eyes blazing. I counted 12. They got 2 left. Jacob's chest swelled with something fiercer than pride. Make that one. He pointed to a fleeing figure in the distance. Eli's got the other. The crack of a rifle echoed across the valley. The last Pinkerton dropped like a sack of flour. Silence settled over the camp, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the distant cry of a hawk. Mary emerged from the smoke, wiping her bloody knife on her trousers. Well, she said, surveying the carnage, that's one way to negotiate severance. By summer's end, the rebellion had a name. The Thorn Alliance, and a territory stretching from the Dakota Badlands to the Sierra foothills. Westwood's holdings shrank daily, abandoned by workers reclaimed by nature. Jacob stood on a ridge overlooking their newest settlement, not a hidden camp, but a proper town with a schoolhouse and a blacksmith. Below, Tommy helped raise the flagpole, his laughter ringing clear as church bells. Eleanor slipped her hand into Jacob's, her fingers calloused but warm. We did it, she murmured. Nah. Jacob squeezed her hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. We just gave them the tools. The wind carried the scent of pine and fresh-cut lumber of bread, baking in new ovens of a future being forged from the ashes of the past. And Jacob Carter, he was exactly where he belonged. The rebellion didn't march under banners or bugle calls. It moved like water through cracks in stone, relentless and patient. Jacob Carter stood at the edge of a reclaimed mining camp, watching Ruth the blacksmith beat a company badge into a plowshare. The ringing of her hammer carried farther than any war drum ever could. Heard from Mary last night, Eleanor said, joining him with a steaming cup of chicory coffee. Westwood's president resigned, jumped from his office window, they say. Jacob sipped the bitter brew, his gaze drifting to where Tommy practiced knife throwing with Roscoe's twin boys. Window was too good for him. Agreed. Eleanor's smile was sharp as the blade at her hip. But the shareholders are scrambling now. Word is they're selling assets for pennies just to flee the country. A commotion erupted by the cook fire, preacher Daniel standing on a stump, his Bible open to Exodus. And the Lord said, "Let my people go." His voice boomed across the clearing as former indentured workers gathered around. Not asking any more, brothers and sisters. Telling. Jacob's chest tightened at the sight. These weren't just rebels anymore. They were a community, a family. The final blow came unexpectedly. Not with gunfire, but ink. A ragged newspaper arrived one morning, its headline screaming, "Westwood Securities declares bankruptcy. Assets seized by federal marshals." Below it, a smaller line, indenture system abolished by congressional vote. Tommy whooped, tossing his hat in the air. We won, Pa. Jacob studied the paper, tracing the names of the voting senators, half of whom had taken Westwood bribes just months before. Nah, Sprout, he murmured. We just made it too expensive for them to keep losing. That night, the Thorn Alliance celebrated with stolen whiskey and songs that would become legends. Ruth forged a commemorative horseshoe from melted company steel. Preacher Daniel married 3 couples who'd been waiting for freedom to start their lives. And Roscoe's stoic hardened. Roscoe wept openly as he burned his old uniform. Autumn found the Carter family back in the mountains, their cabin rebuilt with timber from Westwood's abandoned rail ties. The first snow fell softly, blanketing the valley in quiet white. Tommy knelt by the hearth, arranging his collection of transformed artifacts. A bullet molded into a fishing hook, a shackle reshaped as a dinner bell, the last Westwood badge now serving as a hearthstone. What now, Pa? He asked, watching the flames dance across the metal. Jacob exchanged a glance with Eleanor, her belly rounded with new life. Now he ruffled his son's hair. We live. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and promise through the valley. Somewhere to the east, the wheels of industry still turned. Somewhere new tyrants would rise. But here was something worth fighting for. And Jacob Carter, he was just getting started.